Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, the podcast about comedy. And I have a confession. I don't just love comedy, I need it. I think about it constantly and I'm not alone. Comedians put themselves through hell just for the chance to make people laugh. But why? What does comedy mean to the people who dedicate their lives to it? I put this podcast together to find out. I'm the comedy nerd who's seen more than 1,800 different comedians perform live comedy, and you can find out more about my journey in comedy fandom on my website, thecomedynerd.com. Please also take a moment to like, subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode has quite the CV. She studied a Masters in Modern History and she studied clowning at the Gaulier School, both of which could be seen in her work. She's a veteran Edinburgh Fringe performer and she's a teacher of improv and character comedy. And she's a weirdo. Figuratively and literally, she wears many hats. It's comedian Charlie Vero-Martin. So what would you say was like your earliest memory of comedy having an influence or an impact on you?
Yes, that is a good question. I'm also just realizing that this is the first time I've spoken out loud today. So yeah, first influences of comedy. I feel like comedy, sorry, there's a dog in my garden. Sorry, I will focus, but there's just been a gorgeous chocolate spaniel just ran across our garden. Right, I should close the curtains. Okay. So first thought, the thing that's coming to me most is French and Saunders, and Absolutely Fabulous. And I mean, comedy, my parents used to love watching comedy. Very much a fan. Like we never watched soap operas or anything like that. But it was always sitcoms, Open All Hours, Porridge. My granddad looked quite a lot like Ronnie Barker. So yeah, just always watching sitcoms and comedy. And I think especially French and Saunders. I have an older sister. She's about 4 years older, and we used to do bits from the French and Saunders shows, like the Titanic one especially. I remember we could recite that word for word, and we used to do it all the time. So I'd say that's probably the first, that's like the strongest memory of just being really in love with comedy and it being a part of my life.
Yeah. Would you say that they were specific influences on you and your desire to do comedy for yourself?
Possibly, yeah. It's something that I've not really thought about until people ask me these sort of questions. Like, who are your influences and things? And I think, well, of course, I'd have to say French and Saunders were a huge influence. I think because as well, we're already getting into it, the fact that they were women and it was, I didn't think of that as being a weird thing. Yeah. It's like, this is something, I never thought of it as being female comedy or like, they're women doing, I was just like, this is the comedy my mum and dad watch. Yeah. And I watched with my sister. And I didn't consider the fact that was considered alternative or anything like that. So to me, that was just a thing that, these people did. Yeah. And I'm from Edinburgh. So I grew up in Edinburgh. Obviously, the Edinburgh Fringe has been a part of my life, my entire life. Yeah. So the idea of also seeing live comedy and comedians being around was something I was aware of. Although it was always a kind of, nobody in my family have ever been in the arts or, creative industries or anything. So it was still a very much like that's something other people do. Yeah. But, talking about comedians and like these were the sort of people that my family like loved. And I remember actually the first time I listened to Billy Connolly, my dad used to have Billy Connolly on cassette. And I remember him listening to it over breakfast. And it's the one with the crucifixion. The story of the crucifixion. And and there's the bit which it's a physical gag where he like picks his nose. And my dad could hear me from the other room listening to it, and he like ran in to do the bit so that I wouldn't miss out on what it was, because he realized it was the first time I was listening to it, so I wouldn't know there was a physical joke there. So I remember him running in and doing the bit and then leaving. And yeah, so I think like listening to comedy in the car, listening to and then watching like comedy film. Everything was all, if we were watching a film, it was always going to be comedy and Steve Martin and stuff. Like my dad is actually called Steve Martin, but so American comedy as well. Like that's what we kind of loved and admired.
Yeah.
And I think listening to, I still to this day really, really love listening to like old audio recordings of stand-up and stuff like that.
It's interesting that you pointed out there, obviously growing up in Edinburgh and having the Fringe descend annually. You know, it's you might be the only guest I've had thus far who has an experience of Fringe being thrust upon them rather than them seeking it out. So, I mean, growing up with that massive occurrence, did it seem unusual if you was to go anywhere else and they didn't have the world's largest art festival going on around once a year?
I suppose, I mean, you were always aware that it was special. I mean, Edinburgh people like to talk about how special Edinburgh is. And did you know it's the biggest arts festival in the world? So it was we were aware it was a special thing. But yeah, like, so for instance, I think the biggest issue is that schools go back mid-August in Edinburgh. And so I remember trying to get to my high school. I went to St. Thomas's, which is on the Meadows. It's near Heriot's, which is the big fancy school that looks like Hogwarts. It's the shitty school next to that. Because people, when I tell the story, they're like, "Oh, did you go to Heriot's?" And I'm like, "Absolutely not." So I used to get my bus up towards Bristol Square, and I used to walk through Bristol Square, which is, and then to school. And then sometimes you just turn up and there'd be a giant purple cow in the middle of your route to school. And I'd be like, okay, and like a security guard stopping me from walking through. It's like, "Oh, you can't come through here." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "Oh, you need a pass." And I'm like, "I'm in my school uniform. Like, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm 16. And so you'd have to walk around this big fuck off purple cow to get to school. And, you know, people being on the buses and it just being like a pain in the arse a lot of the time. And it's not because Edinburgh people don't love the arts. We really, really do. But it's just, I think people forget that like life is going on and it's a small city.
Yes.
You know, our population is very, very small. It's a very old city. And then suddenly the population just booms by like 10 times the amount. And I remember being at the Fringe a couple of years ago with a friend. She's like, "Oh, it's not a very pedestrian friendly city." And I'm like, "It is the rest of the year. It's just there are too many pedestrians." Like, I think people who've not been to Edinburgh outside of the Fringe just really don't get, and it's getting worse and worse. And you know, Edinburgh people aren't rude. They aren't mean. They love the Fringe, but it is tough. And I always think it's funny when people do kids shows for the full run and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're really struggling." I'm like, "Yeah, because everyone's at school." Actually, I remember, so I got into the National Youth Theatre when I was 15, 16, which was a huge deal. This was back when they actually did auditions in Edinburgh. And I went down for the training in London, which was like 2-3 weeks or something. I was the only Scottish person there. And, you know, which was great. That kind of blew my mind about like, oh, there's people here who actually want to be actors, like who think that can be a thing they can do. That was the first time, even though I'd been to the Fringe a lot and seen actors and all I had never considered it being an actual profession that would be open to me. And I had a great time. And then I came back, and then the following summer they were doing auditions for their rep and for their shows, because once you're in the National Youth Theatre, you can then audition for their productions. And I went and I auditioned, and you have like the interview afterwards, and they're like, "So what's your availability for July, August?" And I was like, well, I'll be at school from like the 12th of August. And they're like, oh, I was like, yeah, I'm 16, you know? And they were like, oh, well, this production goes on till September. And I'm like, but it's the National Youth Theatre. And like, yeah, but it's English school holidays. And I'm like, wow, okay, so it's not really the
Yeah.
And that was it. So I didn't ever get to do anything else with them because, you know, I'm assuming they were doing a production, maybe part of it was at the Edinburgh Festival, but I couldn't take part.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect to it as well. It's going on, but it actually isn't that accessible to the people there. That's my rant about the National Youth Theatre.
So on being a tour guide, that must have brought an element of humor into the way you sort of pitch to make it more interesting. Is that the foundations of improvising and character comedy?
I mean, I think it helped a lot. So I used to be a tour guide for Mary King's Close in Edinburgh, which is one of the sort of underground haunted historical tours.
Yeah.
And I had to be dressed in a bonnet and everything and be in character the whole time. And I mean, it's beyond anything, you know, you're doing 4 or 5 tours a day. It's an hour-long tour. You're in the dark. There's lots of health and safety issues. You've got 21 people in a space that should only have 12. Because I used to do this job every summer at uni. And when I first started doing it, they were very like, okay, in this section, because of the historical like delicacy of this wall, like you have to split the group in half, and we're only going to do like this many tours a day. And by like the time I was doing it after I was graduating, I had new management, and they were just like, fuck that, let's put as many tours on as we can, stuff as many people on them as we can. And so it was actually very good training, I think, for like you're performing a thing, but you have all these other things going on in your head that you have to be like, okay, this person asked a really long question here, so I'm gonna have to like cut this later on. So this group is a bit slow, so I'm gonna have to make sure I say this bit on the way to this bit. I can hear this other group about to finish in this room, and we're not really meant to let anybody see the other groups to give this illusion that you're down there alone. So you're doing all these things whilst also editing along the way.
Yeah.
And again, this sort of stamina of it as well. Like you're talking for an hour at a time underground. And, you know, that does take some stamina to do. So once you've kind of been used to doing that day in, day out, doing one show for an hour in the evening where you're just on stage and everyone's sat down listening, everything feels really easy after that. I think that in terms of like how it's helped me as a performer, I would say that's the side of it, really.
Yeah. Do you remember your first gig as a comedian?
Yeah, well, so I think the thing is I did improv for a very long time before I did any solo stuff.
Yeah.
So I started improv when I went to university, and I auditioned for the improv and sketch group there. And I got in, and that kind of became like a big part of my life. We used to perform every Monday. And then once a year we'd also do a big sketch show. And then we did the Fringe as well. So I have memories of that as being part of a group. And then when I came to London, I auditioned for Glitch, which was the improvised puppet show. And I have memories of being with them, but I can't necessarily always remember like my first gigs with them. But it wasn't till about 2016, I want to say, or 2015. Because I just got a memory popped up on my Facebook. Actually, this was really weird. On the night I did the work in progress in Leicester, just back in February.
Yeah.
On the way back, I got a notification. It was like 10 years ago today, I did my first ever solo gig. And it was the character of Dante.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dante was the first ever character I did, and it was the first ever solo thing I did. And I I did it at this night called Duck Duck Goose, which still runs. It's always been an improv night.
Hmm.
It used to be that it was because there was so little improv, not little improv, but like 10 years ago, they used to like have a mix of like they'd have an improv group and maybe a character act, and then there'd be a jam and then they'd perform. Now it's just very much just improv. But I did Dante, and I remember being so nervous going in. Also because I was dressed as Dante Alighieri.
Yeah.
He's wearing like a bright red cape and a pointy red hat. And I was going to be speaking in this like crazy Italian accent about a very niche subject. And I think there's something about like it's like a go hard or go home thing when you're doing something that niche.
Yeah.
Or because you've got to make it work. You've got to make it work. There's no like, coming back from that. I guess that's the thing with character comedy. Well, you have to commit to the thing.
Yeah.
If you're standing there in a costume and you've said your name is this, then you have to commit to it. But I think because they were an improv audience and they were familiar with me as an improv performer, so they were on my side and quite excited to see me do something solo.
Yeah.
And so I remember it went really, really well, and I came off being like, "Oh, fantastic! This is what I want to do now."
Yeah.
But definitely like being in a kind of like not quite able to focus on anything before then.
So the character Dante, so that was the foundation then of your first Edinburgh solo.
Yes. Yeah.
Dante's History of the Banished, is that right?
Of the Banished,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was all characters. I didn't appear as myself at all. And I played historical figures and characters from literature who had been exiled. And it was a show about exile, but the theme was actually about home, because I guess that's what exile is an absence of a home, not being able to go home. And it was a reflection. I think it came up, even though I didn't talk about it at all, because I'd moved to London a couple of years before, and it was at the height of the referendum and everything. And so all of those kind of feelings of like being away from home, feeling disconnected from home, I think had maybe subconsciously led to me making that show, even though that didn't become part of it. But then by the time I was performing it in 2017, it was the start of the refugee crisis. So then it then became a little bit about that. And that was kind of like the final thing was like, there are lots of people who feel exiled right now. And, this is the world right now where and so I used to, at the end of it, because it would start with me as Dante, and I'd talk like, I'm always moving, and wherever I go, I got to make a house a home, and I always bring a little potted plant, and I'd always have like a potted plant hidden in my robe that I'd bring out, and and then you put it down and hey, it's a home. And it was it was a very jolly character. Like everyone loved Dante, and it was very easy to improvise with Dante. And then at the end of the show, I would ask who had traveled the furthest to see the show, because obviously it was at the Fringe, and whoever was the furthest away from home got to keep the potted plant.
That's nice.
So there's little IKEA potted plants all over the world now. But then that also started the thing of like, I've decided this is a thing I want to do in my show. That's an added expense. Now I've got to buy 28 potted plants.
So, having gotten into comedy by this point, having been doing improvisation and characters, was it everything that you thought it would be? Did you have like surprises or particular expectations going in?
That is a good question. I think so it's one of those things, going from growing up not having anybody like be a freelancer or work in the arts or in the industry, going from being like, oh, that's not a life I can have, to then pursuing it and then thinking things will happen a lot faster than like because so when I moved to London because I got into a course at the NFTS in writing and producing comedy, sponsored by Channel 4. It was the first ever intake of it, taught by Bill Dare, who unfortunately a few weeks ago passed away. And I thought when I got into this course, because it was quite a rigorous application and interview and stuff. I was kind of like, that's it. I've made it. I'm going to London. I took out a loan. I was like, oh, great. I'm here. I'm doing this course. I got into this improv group. I'm performing regularly. I'm gonna have a BAFTA by 30. Like so I guess in terms of like surprises, it was that thing of like, I think working in this industry, it's like you climb to what you think is the top of the mountain, and then you get there and you realize there's another mountain. Like that's all the best way I could put it. And things like the Edinburgh Fringe, as I say, I grew up in Edinburgh. You'd think that would give me some understanding of how the Edinburgh Fringe works. I mean, I guess it gave me some idea of the scale of it, which a lot of people don't have. But it's taken me until like literally now, and I'm still finding out stuff about how comedy at the Fringe works and how the industry actually works. Like I always say that like I spaffed my debut away. That's the best way I can put it. It's a vulgar term, but it's true because people like, I didn't realize until way later that people do this whole thing of like working on their debut for years and years and years and going up to the Fringe and doing 45 minutes and then doing that and then going and making a big splash.
Yeah.
I didn't do that. I just was like, I've written a show. I'm going to go do it. And also that first Dante show, I only did 2.5 weeks, which according to the website meant that I should have been seen by the awards, but I wasn't, because that's not how it works. And there were people who then did say like, oh, you should just do the exact same show next year. And the following year being that you should do the exact same show. I was like, no, I've written another show, so I'm going to do that. And they're like, Charlie, you're not getting it. This is not how it works. I'm like, yeah, but I'm done with that show. So again, I don't know. Maybe if I did know some of these things, I still wouldn't have done some things differently. But yeah, I think the thing that shocked me was just how much more there is to it than being a good performer and writer. Like, I think I was naive that, you work hard and all this stuff. And then you like realize that, oh no, wait, there's way more going on and in the background.
Yeah. The thing that you said there about, I'm done with that show, I'll move on to the next. You put a lot of effort into writing and trying out the jokes and putting together a show. And then hopefully you're going to perform the show at the Fringe, for example. And then maybe you get to tour it a little bit and do a few other places. At what point do you then say, I am done with that? Now it's that show it's gone. It's no longer exists. And now it's all about the next thing. And so is there a crossover between the new show and the previous show? Is there, how much investment do you put into it once you feel it's completed?
That is a problem for me. Because I know the sensible thing would be to like, it's almost like, so with Picnic, for example, that's the longest I'd worked on a show. Well, with the first 3 shows, so with Dante, 24/7 Club, and Scrapbook, I did them consecutive years.
Yes.
So 2017, 18, 19, which was quite a common thing for people to do with the Fringe back then. Also, I want to say that being from Edinburgh means I could stay with my family when I'm in Edinburgh. That's how I was able to afford it. And I was unaware that people did things like hire PRs and directors. And, I didn't do any of the big 4 venues. So I did it sort of on the cheap, if you will.
Right.
So I could afford to do it every year. And in my head, I kind of always assumed that like creating things and doing and innovating was the good thing to do. Having something fresh to offer. I didn't realize that actually what most people do is they work for a very long time on a show. They then take it to Edinburgh. So then it's when it's perfect. And then from there, they continue touring that perfect show. So there's a bit of me was like, didn't realize that's what you're meant to do. But even with me knowing that now, I still think I would struggle to do that because all of my shows are very personal to me and how I feel at that point in time and in my life. And often it's something that it's like I need to almost get out of my system, like I need to explore it. And it's what I find funny at that point and what I really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And then once I've been doing it for 2 years or so, or even, well, with the first 3, less than, although I'd maybe been doing some of the characters individually, there comes a point where it doesn't feel, this is going to sound wanky, but it's the only word coming to me, but like it doesn't feel authentic to me to be doing that bit or that character because I feel like I've moved on or the world's moved on, or I've maybe just done it so much that I don't really feel the fun in it anymore. Yeah, and I think that's it. I think it's ultimately I get bored. I get bored and I want to do the next thing. I'm so excited about the new idea I've had and I want to jump into that and do that.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about Picnic was, that's the longest I'd worked on a show before doing the show. And it'd gone through various iterations that I'd taken to Leicester. And I did work with a director and we worked in a very different way because in previous shows, I had an idea of like, I'd maybe had 1 or 2 characters already that I was gigging with. And then I was like, what sort of connects them? And then I would come up with a theme or an idea. So whether it was the Exile thing or 24/7 Club, I did historical figures who had the same birthday as me.
Yeah.
And so like I had a theme and an idea and then things came out of that. So it kind of was like an inside out sort of thing. Whereas with Picnic, it was more outside in. So like I had all this material and different things, and then it was trying to bring it back together.
Yeah.
And I think by the time I had done it at Edinburgh, and then I did it for Next Up Comedy, which was a whole exhausting thing because it had to be copyright free. And so I had to basically rewrite the show and find new music and like that was just awful. And then I was horrific. I think I had COVID. I'm pretty sure I was horrifically ill for the recording, so it didn't feel worth it. And then I did it at Soho Theatre. And by the time I was doing it at Soho, I was like, I'm done with this show because I love it. I wanted to take it to Soho. I feel like this is a good place to say goodbye. Right. Also because I just carrying all the props and like the organization, and it was tech heavy as well. So I had to have a specific like techs who knew the show, and I had to have Daniela. It's just like there was so much in it. But then also I was exhausted from, the logistics of the show, but also it felt like I'd been doing that material for a while and I wasn't as connected to it. It would feel disingenuous, I think, sometimes doing a show past the point.
Yeah.
And but Picnic was the first time I decided to stop doing a show where I didn't already have an idea for the next thing. Because usually I'd be like, oh, I have an idea of what the next thing's going to be and I'm going to start working on that right away. I didn't have that with Picnic. It was like, okay, I'm retiring the show after. Well, I did Soho and then I did it at Leicester one last time.
Yeah.
And it was like, and then I don't know what comes next. And that was the first time I'd kind of been in that position.
Yeah.
Did any of that make sense?
Yeah. So now, after 4 Edinburgh shows and establishing yourself firmly as a character comedian, you're working on your new show, which is stand-up.
Yeah, I mean, you say that as if it's a real thing. You say that as if it's a thing I'm actually doing. And to be honest, it was actually after the conversation I had with you at ACMS. The next day, that was the first time I seriously thought about doing another Edinburgh.
Right.
Because after Picnic, I was like, I can't afford to do that again. Like, it's so expensive now, and I'm from Edinburgh. Like, I just can't afford that. Even without the tech and the props and the extra people, like, so I'd kind of decided, like, after Picnic that I probably wasn't going to do a solo show at Edinburgh again, or at least not in the same capacity.
Right.
I'd had a year of like not having any thoughts about, I actually thought about trying to write a one-woman play because that's what everybody told me I should do after Picnic. They're like, if you did a play, you might get an agent. I'm like, okay. And the problem is when a comedian tries to write a serious play, it doesn't happen. It just ends up being another comedy show. So I'd booked Leicester in September. That's when we get offered the slots for Weirdos Weekend.
Yes.
And I was like, well, I'll do Leicester because I love doing Leicester and I love going for Weirdos Weekend. So I'll book a slot and I'll just do all the sort of like new material that I've been gigging with occasionally whenever, like I maybe did like 6 gigs last year. I'll do some of this new material and maybe some of the material that didn't make it into Picnic. I'll have enough stuff. I'll work on something for February. And then, and I was like, okay, it got to February and I hadn't written a show or anything, but I did know I had a lot of material. So I literally wrote that Leicester show like the 3 days before that Leicester show. I went through the notes app on my phone through all the stuff and like various voice notes I'd made over the past 2024 and just wrote down anything that felt like something. and I actually and then I that morning, well the afternoon before and then that morning of the show in Leicester, I just put every idea on a post-it, including some of the old material from Picnic. And I think but I was aware that I didn't actually want to do any of that old Picnic stuff that didn't make it in because I was like, this doesn't feel like my voice anymore. Like when I was kind of doing stand-up sections in Picnic, it was still like a persona of me that me and the director had kind of worked on. And I was like, this doesn't sound like me anymore. I'm not this person. And it, to be honest, it hadn't always felt like me at the time. Like it felt quite off. Because I'd never really ever considered myself a stand-up. So it had always felt like somewhat of a persona. So I ended up just really doing the new stuff. I read it all out to myself that morning. I went and had breakfast at St. Martin's. I wrote them all out on clean Post-its. And then I went to Duffy's and did the show. And I really enjoyed it. I had a great time. And I mean, for people who, I realized you were there, but for the podcast, I just had all the Post-its stuck on the wall. And some of it, I was like, I know this will lead to this and this will lead to that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I'm just going to pick a Post-it and do that bit as it is in my head. And an hour flew by. And I think that was it. And I had Post-its to spare on the wall. I had material that I didn't even get to. And it felt really nice to just, it felt very freeing to not have to worry about like, oh, well, I've got to make sure I do this bit because the tech knows he's got a sound effect for this bit. And oh, I've carried this prop with me. I better use it. Like, so I found it extremely liberating. And as a result, since then, I've been writing more. And I did that gig at ACMS and I did another gig between Leicester and ACMS and I've got a gig tonight. And so I think I'm applying to Camden Fringe, to do an hour at Camden potentially. So literally as of the past 2 weeks, it sounds like I'm doing potentially an hour in Edinburgh in 2026.
Right.
Yeah, heard it here first, folks. But yeah, like it's funny you say it's like, so, and of course your next show. And I'm like, yes, of course, my next show. You're the only person I've talked to. My husband doesn't even know I'm planning another show. But he'll be thrilled because it's not going to be character prop led. So, I mean, my house is just bursting with wigs and shit. So I think he'll just be thrilled that I'm not going to have any more like props in the house. We've still got a dog cage. We don't have a dog. We're never getting a dog, but there's still an extra large dog cage in our flat. So these are the things you've got to think about.
Yeah. There's a couple of things you brought up there. You mentioned Weirdos Weekend, so we'll talk about the Weirdos Collective briefly in a bit. But I at least know you primarily as a character comedian, and obviously stand-up is not something I've seen you do that much until this year.
You're not alone there. Well, that's very new.
But that's...
Nobody has.
That's what's interesting to me, because you talk about personal stories and about being yourself, but you are not being yourself. You're being Dante or, a picnic basket or something. You're being other, so.
When you put it like that, it sounds silly. Sorry, continue. You're making a very good point. I'm just deflecting. Yeah.
How dare you be silly and have fun on stage? How dare you? So yeah, but this idea of character and who you're being on stage and who you're playing, do you find that you can tell stories that are personal to you because someone else is relaying it? Does it afford you some protection that it's a character that you're playing and not yourself?
Yes, completely. And I think that is why I did character. That was the first time I did solo stuff, and I did it for so long as well. Also I love it. I love that style of comedy. And I did start doing some stand-up in 2019 was probably the first time I ever did a gig just as myself. And then I kind of stopped because I was like, oh, I'm just doing this so I have bits to go from A to B in my show. And then obviously there was pandemic. And then I did in 2022 start trying to do more stand-up because I thought Picnic was maybe going to be more half and half. But again, it still didn't feel quite like me. And I think it was because I didn't feel just confident enough in myself. I felt it was so much easier to talk about things in character. There's so much more, I feel like there's freedom because no one's looking at you and thinking it's you and your opinions. You can say it's this character.
Yeah.
Actually, it's quite interesting that a bit I did in Leicester, which I wasn't necessarily planning to do. It was a joke that got a big laugh. It's a bit about having limited time for witches. And I did it ACMS as well. So I did it extended there, and I'm probably going to do it tonight. But the sort of kernel of that was a bit as part of a thing I did as Jane Austen in 2019. And it's funny because it's almost word for word, some of it, but it's a completely different context and a completely different character. And I mean, it's better. I've improved on it, but it's weird. And I think, is it just because, I was worried that people would think I was being mean, so I felt the need to say it as Jane Austen or something. And actually, I think the other thing is I was going to say when I started trying to do some stand-up stuff in 2022, and I realized that there were people who didn't realize I was a character comedian, and when they saw me do character, I remember Lorna Rose Treen being like, "Oh, I didn't know you were a character comedian." I'm like, "Yes, of course, that's who I am. That's who I am. I'm not a stand-up. No, I love character. That's what I am." And even at that ACMS gig, when I turned up and everyone else is doing like character and clown, I was like, oh no, I miss this. I don't want to be the stand-up at a fun night. I don't want to be that person. I love character so much. But again, I feel like maybe it's just I've reached a point in my life where some things I do feel I need to just say as me. Because I did love stand-up growing up, and that was the thing I felt. Because there's a lot of things in like improv community, especially of being quite anti-stand-up, of thinking like stand-ups are all dickheads, which a lot of them are. And the same with character and alt comedy. It's like, oh yeah, stand-up, so mainstream, yeah. And the thing is, I'd always be like, yeah, but secretly I really love stand-up. And when I was a teenager, I used to go watch sketch and stand up. I used to watch everything, but I also used to watch stand up at the Edinburgh Fringe and like read books on it. And I'd have badges on my school bag of like stand up comedians. Like I'm that geek. And so there is something for me about like, it feels like the more genuine thing now for me to be like, well, I have to admit, I actually really love stand up and I've always wanted to do it. And now I feel like I'm actually in a position where I feel I can, and I don't have to be in character to do it.
Right.
I don't know if that answers your question. I can't remember what the question.
Well,
about being your voice through it, and
yeah,
yeah. And I think character always felt like the more fun way to do it, and it also felt like the more acceptable way for me to do it. Like people, enjoyed me being characters.
Yeah.
So I was like, great, I'll do that. And it's, it follows on from improv and sketch a lot more fluidly. Whereas stand-up, I think also always just felt a little arrogant. It has this, in the improv. And so I think maybe there's a bit of me that's like, I've gotten over that fear of having to be giving everything. Like if I've not handmade a puppet, I'm not worth the audience's time. And it's like, no, I'm maybe enough. I don't have to be in a costume for these thoughts to be worth hearing and funny.
Yeah. But that begs the question, the obvious question. When you're playing you, is that a character?
No, I think more recent. So I think when I was doing it in 2022,
yeah,
and when I was doing segments of it in Picnic, it felt like a character. It felt like this sort of persona that my director and I had kind of come up with, and like advice from various people. Like I did a Soho theatre stand-up course during the pandemic and stuff, and it was like, and it all made sense. It was all good advice at the time. But I think having taken a year off, basically, when I finished Picnic, and I kind of took a year off.
Yeah.
And it sort of quietened all the advice and what like you should be doing and seeing what other people were doing. And it gave me like some space to just sort of talk as myself. And I really wasn't sure for the Leicester show. It's like, this could either be fine or it could be horrific. This could be awful and I'll never do it again. So I was as pleasantly surprised as anyone else that I was able to talk for an hour as myself and not feel like I have to put on a voice or put on a persona. And I was actually quite surprised by how myself I was.
Right.
Because yeah. And I think doing Picnic did help me get there. There were elements like at the end of Picnic where I kind of did the big rant. And and even the gatekeep, like there were bits of it where I felt like I was starting to talk as me. But then because it's part of this much bigger theatrical concept, it then had to be brought back,
right?
Pulled back. So it was kind of nice to just be like, there's nothing else that I'm having to serve up here. So we'll see. We'll see. And, hopefully people won't be like, you're so judgmental towards witches. I I think I've reached a point where I don't care anymore.
So we mentioned Weirdos Weekend at Leicester. So tell me about your involvement in the Weirdos Collective and what that is to you.
Yeah, I mean, Weirdos has been great. Weirdos has been, yeah, it's changed my life. Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly helped that kind of post picnic storm of doing, because when you're doing solo stuff as well, it can get very lonely. Even when you have like a Daniela or a director and stuff, there's something very lonely about doing solo shows and the pressure of doing an Edinburgh and everything being on you. So it's really, really nice to be part of a collective. And I think it's all the stuff I sort of missed about improv, because I'm not in an improv group anymore and I don't really feel the need to be, because there's a lot of admin and stuff with that. So last year, I mean, I did 4 shows with Weirdos. And I think really just appreciated being able to have something to do with other people and with people that I really admire. And I still kind of like, I admire the people in Weirdos so much and have done for such a long time that I still kind of like I can still be a little bit not fangirly, but it's like, oh, these people are my friends now. Like these people like know who I am now. I joined in the pandemic. And I have to admit, I hadn't really I'd heard of all the Weirdos shows, but for one reason or another, I couldn't go because I was doing my own show at Edinburgh or whatever. But I was aware of all of them and I'd seen Adam perform and I just from doing ACMS and stuff, I knew like pretty much everyone in it. And I remember being like, this is a really cool group of people. Like, I want to be part of this. And so one day I just like DM'd Adam Larcher on Twitter, I think. And I was like, hello, my name is Charlie. I think we met at this gig, blah, 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 blah. And I'm a character comedian, and I was wondering what I would need to do to be involved in your group. Like, and he was like, oh, hi, yeah, you should come and you should be in it. I mean, Adam then later admitted to me that one of the big reasons I got in is because the Chapels are big fans. The Chapels are this extremely lovely couple who are huge comedy fans, particularly alternative comedy fans. They're massive supporters of Weirdos. They come to every single show and have done, I think, for the past 10 years. And I think they are kind of like guardian angels for me because they came to see my Dante show in 2017. So I did it. I was in Paradise in the Vault. So it's a venue that's like, nobody knows of this venue. Nobody knew who I was. Like, I really turned up to 2017 Fringe, like nothing, like doing everything myself. And like, nobody had a clue who I was. And yet they took a punt on coming to see my show. They were doing like a marathon of how many shows you can see in a weekend. And so they came to see the show. There was a lot of audience participation in the show and they were super up for it and they just loved it and they loved the show. And I was like, oh my God, this couple like who don't know me at all came to the show and they've really loved it. And it meant so much to me. And then they came to see my show every year after that, 2018, 2019. And Adam was like, well, I saw that the Chapels liked you. So you must be our kind of people, sort of thing and then he'd seen me perform and stuff. So the first show I did with Weirdos was actually online during the pandemic. And it was like a Weirdos in Space thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, very much didn't quite get the whole, like I was kind of nervous and didn't really know anybody. And then the first proper live show I did was the True Crime convention at Halloween a couple of years ago. And I was paired up with Eleanor Morton, who's somebody I have like, our lives have kind of like come in and out of each other's worlds over the years. And now we're working together quite a lot. And so, yeah, that was really fun. But yeah, so it's the closest I think I'll ever get to being in the Muppets.
Yeah.
And Adam Larter is very much Kermit the Frog.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's all the things I love about comedy, and it's all the things I love about the industry and the arts, is that being around very talented people doing very creative, silly things, and almost them not knowing, no one really realizing just how like special they are. And it's just a room full of those people just doing really funny, silly stuff, all very nice people as well. Like it's a very special group. And I'm really, really happy to be part of it for sure.
Yeah. One thing I always say is that one of my favorite things about watching live comedy is the fun that the people performing are having. And there's no group of people have more fun on stage, I think, than the weirdos.
Yeah.
It's because the show, forget the show.
Yeah.
It's all a bit silly and a bit slapdash. But
yeah, some people might claim we have too much fun.
yeah, that's part of the joy in it. It's really and the collective is as I said to you before, is a favorite of the Leicester Festival.
Yeah. And the Weirdos weekend this year felt very special. Like when I saw where we were performing, that we were in the Guildhall, because last year, after I'd done Picnic, I went around the museum and I went and looked in that room and I was like, wow, because I studied modern history, so I'm like a big history geek. And I remember like, oh wow, this is so cool. Like Shakespeare performed here. And then Weirdos performed. Which just was like, this is wild that we're performing on the same stage that Shakespeare did. And again, like, and a massive, like, in terms of people being able to have fun on stage, like, again, that's all down to like the good grace of Adam. Because for that show, I'd said, look, I'm going to be super busy. I said at Christmas time, look, I'm going to be super busy that weekend because I'm going to be starting teaching and working, and I'm going to be writing my own solo show. And then it got even worse because I was doing all this BBC stuff. And so I said to Adam, like, I can't have any, like, please don't give me many lines. And he basically, the scene he gave me was like, Charlie enters as Microsoft Paint. And then that was it. He's just like, and you can improvise for 10 minutes. That was it. And he was like, at the end, I've got to get a password from you. We'll work that out. And so it was that's so much trust to give someone. And then it did descend in me just hitting Adam with a giant cardboard prop, being like, this is how it feels to use Microsoft Paint. If poor Adam, anytime we're in a scene together, I do end up just whacking him with a cardboard prop, but like, it's what the people want. So yeah, and it's like, you don't get that kind of opportunity from any other kind of director. And Leicester, especially, the audience are up for that and they'll go with you on it. And again, like, that's how I think Edinburgh Fringe used to feel. I feel like that's what it was maybe like even before my time. There's maybe a slither of that still when I started doing it pre-pandemic, but I feel that's completely gone now from Edinburgh because there's just too much riding on it. There's too much pressure. The audiences are so vast and different in terms of what they want. Like, some of them are just there to get drunk. Some of them don't even know what it is. Whether it's with Leicester, it's people who are there because they really love comedy, and particularly alternative comedy, and they've chosen to go see this act and to support new material and to support a new act, and which allows for so much more fun to be had. Yeah. I hope never change, Leicester. Never change.
Well, given that we've just talked about how much fun you've been having, do you have like a comfort zone? Because you've got all these shows that you've been performing. You've got the weirdo shows. You've got your own shows. You've got stand-ups. You've got character. You've got acting, improv. You teach. Do you have a place that you feel happiest when you're writing, performing, teaching?
Yeah, I feel like that changes a lot. It's shifted a few times over the years. even just talking about how I just remembered it's like, actually, my first 3 solo shows were all history based, because that used to be like my thing was like, oh, I have a master's degree in history. And so all my shows were meant to be like using that. And then I kind of, Picnic was a big pivot away from that, sort of allowing myself freedom from that. And now I've kind of, as we've just been talking about, I've kind of pivoted away from having to talk in character. So it kind of shifts. I mean, I do love character. I teach a character comedy course that I've created.
Yeah.
It's a 6-week course. I've taught it twice now. And I'd say right now, that's what I really love. I really love directing and helping other people with their acts. And I've been doing quite a bit more sort of directing in terms of, I don't know if you'd call it dramaturgy or what, but like almost like consulting, like coming into someone else's project and kind of helping them get to where they need to be and fixing things. And a few months ago, I did, Mikey Blythe-Smith asked me to come in as a mentor on a program that he created called I'm with Stupid. And it was like an ACE funded thing where people were comedians applied, sort of newer comedians applying for mentorship, and he'd pair them with somebody. And so I got paired with Hannah White. So we spent an afternoon together so she's primarily a stand-up and a cartoonist. She works at the Cartoon Museum. And she's like, well, I have an idea for a character or a couple of characters, but I've never done character comedy before. And, I don't really know what to do and stuff. So she kind of told me some of her ideas, and we worked on this one about a character called Roger Prick. And I like basically sort of got it up on its feet and, helped her structure it a bit and gave her like some advice and some coaching. And she's been gigging with that character since, and now she's in the finals of SketchUp. So she's like, I feel like you're like the father of Roger Prick. And I was like, I'm going to go with doula. I'm doula. And so I guess that's what I'm kind of enjoying. I like helping birth characters. That sounds really wanky, but it's the best way to say it. Cause like, I really do. I love, the last 6 weeks of the character comedy course I did, like I'd full 12 people in it. And I'm kind of sharing my process and like how I do things, which I didn't realize was quite unusual until they're all sitting me being like, what the fuck? Why do you do it? That sounds like a really weird way to do things. And I'm like, it works. And it does. And then over the 6 weeks, they come out with completely original new ideas, and they're all vastly different. And because some of them come being like, oh, I have an idea for a character. And then I'm like, okay, well, try not to think about that for a couple of weeks. Let's just do this process for a bit and see how it goes. And it's just really fun. And I really enjoy helping them kind of get these characters on their feet and polish them up. And I do a lot of improv coaching as well. And it's a similar thing, just sort of seeing the individual person and what they bring, and helping them flesh that out. So I really enjoy that. But I also say there's nothing beats actually performing. Like, I don't think I could ever imagine my life never being on stage. And likewise, like having done some more stuff on camera and things recently, it's like nothing live comedy on stage or live theater is the best. And even still, live comedy, I think, trumps everything.
Yeah. There is so much more I want to ask you, and I couldn't think of a better place to end the main body of our chat than on that sentiment. So thank you for that. How can we find out about you and where we can come and see you performing?
The best way is to follow me on Instagram at Charlie Vero-Martin. I also have a Substack where I don't spam people. I send out something about once a month with upcoming shows and courses. I've gotten rid of X. I'm on the Blue Sky, but I don't really use it so much. So I'd say Instagram and Substack are the best ways to find me. I have a website as well, which is Charlie Vero-Martin, but yeah, that's the best way, I'd say.
And that brings me to my final question, of course, then the question I ask all of my guests. How, Charlie, would you sum up comedy in a nutshell?
I think based on what we've been talking about and the fact that I didn't read that email before the interview, so I've not thought about it before either. I'm gonna say it's the joy of creating something that didn't exist before that brings joy to other people. Comedy always has to have somewhere to go, and I think that's something I've been seeing people who write a lot but then don't perform it or don't put it out, or they do it just for themselves. And comedy has to have a receptor, a receiver, and I love receiving it as much as I love performing it. I think most comedians, I don't think you can be a comedian unless you're a lover of comedy as well. So yeah, I think that's it. It's the creation of joy for both yourself giving it and whoever receives it, and the lovely loop that continues.
Charlie, thank you so much. It's been a genuine pleasure and a privilege talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that's been lovely.